Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your Tuesday edition of Pelicans Daily, brought to you by Fan Arch, and I'm your host, David Grubb, editor in chief of thebirdrights.com. Another busy day for the New Orleans Pelicans, and some tough news as late on Monday afternoon, the Pelicans announced that they were shutting down both Zion Williamson and CJ McCollum for the remainder of the regular season as they recover from injuries. For CJ, very tough, a difficult season for him, his most difficult in New Orleans. And I think that's the frustrating thing about with CJ is that when he was brought in, immediately there was success with the Pelicans as far as getting the team into the playoffs, winning the play-in that year, getting to the playoffs, going 6 games with the Suns. It felt like the Pelicans were setting up something to build for reasons beyond CJ McCollum's control. And I think that that's an important part to have about this conversation whenever we talk about CJ. Beyond CJ McCollum's control, the Pelicans have not done as expected since then. And I think CJ is a lot of times just been miscast in his role. And I think that, we have to remember how well he's played since joining the Pelicans. He played 56 games this year, averaged 21 points per game. The start of the season was really rough for CJ. He got injured like everyone else. He wasn't shooting the ball well, particularly from the free throw line. But he ends up the season averaging more than 21 points a game. Another season in his career where he's done that. He's been as one of the steadiest players in the league and consistently averaging 20 points per game each season. Will finish the season leading the Pelicans with 171 made 3-pointers. He's the all-time leader in 3-point made field goals for the Pelicans. Continues to climb up the franchise's scoring list. And, let's also not forget he had four 40-point games this season, including a 50-point game against the Washington Wizards on January 3rd. Pelicans in those 40-point games this season were 3-1. He's the only player in Pelicans history like as the most 40-point games in a season. The only player who had more than him in a single season is Anthony Davis. So when you look at CJ McCollum's career, and he still has one more year under contract next season for $30.6 million. But when you look at what the Pelicans have gotten for CJ McCollum since he arrived in New Orleans, I think the value he's matched or exceeded the value that they expected for him. That has not translated, unfortunately, into on-court success for a number of reasons, and a lot of those beyond his control. Again, it's not his fault that people got injured. It's not his fault that coaching staffs have not maximized the talent on the roster when they've had it available to them. And there are times, that when his play is frustrating. I think every player can be frustrating from time to time. But for CJ, I think that fans have been unfair to him when he's only supposed to have been the third guy. That's like, let's just put it on his scale. And though the Pelicans have not matched their success, if the Miami Heat didn't win a title, you didn't blame Chris Bosh for that. You know what I mean? You don't blame Chris Bosh. That the heavy lifting, though, yeah, he's part of the big three. You didn't. The heavy lifting was D Wade and LeBron. Not to say that Chris Bosh wasn't a Hall of Famer because he is, but the point of the story is, where did the responsibility ultimately lie? CJ has to perform. That's his job. But the responsibility of leading the franchise was on Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. And they did not elevate the franchise to the heights. They have not, in the case of Zion Williamson, elevated the franchise to the heights that as expected. But ultimately, I'm not going to put that on CJ McCollum. And it intrigues me when you're at the arena and you hear so many fans who have a problem with CJ, either with his salary or his performance. And my thing is, his salary is commensurate with in the NBA, is commensurate with what his production has been. You're getting 20 points every night by and large from CJ McCollum. You're getting he changed his game and went from being a high volume mid range shooter to being a high volume 3-point shooter. And he's done that to the point that he's the best 3-point shooter in the history of the franchise as far as volume goes. His percentage is up there pretty well too. You can almost count on it that CJ's going to shoot 40% from three. So he's right there in those categories. Professionalism, um, his willingness every night to come in and compete and lead this team as best he can. Look, you can like lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. There's only so many things that CJ can do in the locker room and be the example, but he has been the example. I'll say that CJ does not run away from the media after tough losses. CJ does not run to get praise after big wins. He is even keeled. And I think that his value for next season, ultimately, that's the discussion, is his value for next season. It's hard to calculate CJ's value for next season right now until you know other things about the Pelicans going forward, like the draft results and the health status of some of these players, because the Pelicans are so injured at this stage. And though Trey Murphy has had his surgery and Herb Jones has had his surgery and DeJounte Murray has had his surgery, you're going into next season. You don't know who your shooter is going to be to start the season. And right now, the only one on your roster is CJ McCollum, the only proven one. So I think it's in the Pelicans' best interest. If we're talking about the long term future of CJ McCollum, I think it's in the Pelicans' best interest to keep CJ around for a while, even into next season, and make that decision going towards the trade deadline, because CJ has an expiring contract. CJ has a skill that is desirable around the NBA. Um, and I think that certainly if the Pelicans are not in contention next year, and it would be a big stretch for us to think about them being in contention. They could be a playoff team next season, but contention is a big jump. So if we say if the Pelicans are not in contention, then CJ becomes an attractive piece to a team that is. So I think the Pelicans will hold on to CJ this offseason unless a perfect deal comes along. But other than that, I think they stick around with CJ into next season and see if they can get this thing right in the first half of the season. By then, a lot of things will have come into place for the Pelicans. The bigger part that Pelicans fans are concerned about would be Zion Williamson. Um, Another season for Zion that ends in injury. In 6 seasons now, he's only played more than 40 games twice. Um, you have 3 seasons with 30 games or less, and then you have uh, 1 season with no games at all. So, um, you have the 30 games this season, 24 games. His rookie season, 29 games in 2023. So yeah, it's been very frustrating. Especially considering last year you were coming off of Zion playing the most games in his career. He played 70 games last season. He got hurt obviously in the play-in against the Lakers, and things changed. But it seemed like he had arrived. Um, and the success with Zion on the court again is one of those things that you can't deny. In 214 games on the court, the Pelicans are 109 and 105 when Zion plays. Okay. They are 100 and 151 without him, including going 11 and 34 this season. They were 10 and 20 with him on the court. So, roughly a 33%, not roughly, and exactly in a 33% win percentage with him, but less than 25% without him. And, um, I think it just shows again the disparity that the one thing Zion can do is make this team better. That's the one thing that no matter who he is playing with, and you saw it in the Minnesota game, his last game before he heard a win for the Pelicans, Zion can elevate groups of players that are not elite to be competitive. And that always makes this the most difficult thing about thinking about moving on from Zion, is just that no matter what your level of talent, you're going to be in the game. You're going to be in the game. And, Zion this year, you saw the development, you saw the conversations about this being his best overall season on both sides of the basketball. Offensively, while he wasn't scoring the highest point total, but considering the minutes that he was playing, his per 36 numbers were among the best in the league as far as scoring. He was also putting up his best rebound numbers, his best assist numbers, his best block numbers, his best steal numbers. So he was engaged and making an impact. The unfortunate thing again is that we're constantly looking at this from what if. And so for Zion, that part is the part that goes into the evaluation of the Pelicans. You have a team that is 21 and 54, that is fourth place in the chase for the NBA's worst record, and trying to get the first pick in the 2025 NBA draft. So for the rest of the season, what the Pelicans are going to be doing is letting the youngsters play as they have been over the last week. That's basically the team that you saw over the last 3 games is the team you're going to see over the next 7 games. Um, and we'll play this out, and then we'll see what decisions the Pelicans make. The number one decision for them starts with, do you keep Willie Green? We'll discuss that at length. You can check back at previous episodes about my opinion about Willie Green, and I'm sure in the future we'll talk about it again. But that's the first decision that has to be made. Then you have to decide, if are you going to build around Zion Williamson for the short term future or the long term future, or not at all. If it's the short term future, if you're anticipating that you've got 3 seasons with Zion Williamson under contract and you've got to win by the end of season 2, essentially be in position to compete for an NBA championship by the end of season 2, or maybe not be in the finals, but certainly be among the very best teams, the top 4 in the West by the end of season 2. If you're not in that position, then you're thinking about trading Zion before season 3, because you can't go into the season with the entire NBA knowing that Zion Williamson wants out and it's a fire sale. So if the short term build is the key, if that's what you're operating on, is that we got to win in short term, then you're making different decisions with your talent, especially in the draft. If you get Cooper Flag, then you think about plugging and playing with Cooper Flag. If you don't get Cooper Flag and you're thinking about winning in the next 3 years, then you have to have serious conversations. If it's not the right player, if you don't feel like that player can come in and immediately address needs, then you need to think about trading that draft pick. So Zion's history influences the future. You know that you may not have you likely will not have Zion for a full season of production. At the most, you've seen him play 70 games. At best, you're counting on him. Let's say you're counting on him to give you 65 so he qualifies for awards. That's the goal for the next regular season. Can you get him to qualify for awards at 65 games? So if that's the case, then your roster needs to be built to maximize those 65 games. And then for those other um, 17 games in the 82 game schedule, you know, the other 17 games you figured out. Whatever we can do. If we can stay above 500, if you can be 9-8 in those other 17 games, if you can be closer to 500 without Zion, that's what you're trying to build this team. But primarily, the main roster, if you're keeping him, you got to find flexibility and players that will maximize his talents in the short term. And you've got to deal with the injuries to those starters that you're thinking about for the start of next season. Because if your starting lineup includes CJ McCollum, includes Zion Williamson, but you start the season without Herb Jones, without Trey Murphy, without DeJounte Murray, how many of the guys on the current roster can you start? How many of the guys do you need to have how many starters do you need to have and acquire this offseason? That's the question. So, and that would be for either Willie Green or the new coach to evaluate first and foremost. And until there's a plan, then the Pelicans can't move forward. And then if you're thinking, okay, we're gonna look for the long future for Zion, then you got to do 2 things too. You got to get this team better fast, and you got to sign him to an extension, and you have to plan those players around him too. So then you're probably more likely, if you're talking about we're going to do a long, extensive rebuild, and you could convince Zion to get on board with that, then you're probably trading CJ in the offseason. But I don't think that that's the plan. I think the short-term plan is the one that's more likely for the Pelicans. So I think that you, as I said in the first segment, is that you end up keeping CJ for the short term, and then we start reevaluating that before the trade deadline next season. There's going to be a lot of speculation about whether or not Zion Williamson does get traded himself. There are teams that are looking to try to get him. Um, The Lakers and the Heat have been mentioned pretty regularly. Another team that gets mentioned pretty often is the Portland Trail Blazers. Uh, I don't know if the Pelicans would make that deal. I think that there are players that the Pelicans would be interested in, but are you making that deal to give a team in the Western Conference Zion Williamson? I don't know. Another team that's been mentioned as a potential trade partner, the Pelicans uh, just finished playing them on Sunday. That'd be the Charlotte Hornets. That's another team that people have speculated. I think that would depend on who the draft would have to be a very serious part of that. Then what the speculation would be. Again, I think any trade talks about Zion Williamson are heavily dependent on whether or not the Pelicans get the number one pick in this draft. And then somebody's going to have to make an overwhelmingly good offer to David Griffin for him to do that. Considering everything that's gone wrong this season, to trade BI, to trade, um, and then to come back at the end of the year and you trade Zion Williamson, I don't know how after you've raised ticket prices and things like that, I just don't know how they sell that. I don't know how the Pelicans can sell that. So I think that, in the meantime, the Pelicans are just continuing to try to finish this thing out. 7 games remaining in the season and just get to the off season. Like that's where we are at this stage of the game. Just get to the off season and try to make things right. The rest of the week ahead before the Pelicans come back home on Friday night. They got a pair of games, excuse me, not Friday night, Sunday night. Pelicans have a pair of games on the West Coast on Wednesday and Friday. They will play the Clippers on Wednesday and the Lakers on Friday. Those games are important to the Clippers and the Lakers in their playoff positioning. For the Pelicans, they're going to be talent wise, again, the rest of the season just over. Um, you just want to see if the rookies in particular, four guys, Carlo, Eves, Antonio, and Keon, those are the guys that you pay attention to over the last 7 games. It's not Jordan Hawkins. You know what you have in Jordan Hawkins, what you don't have in Jordan Hawkins, in my opinion. It's not anybody else, none of the vets. I'm not watching Bruce Brown. I'm not worried about Bruce Brown's development. I'm not worried about Kelly Olynyk's development at this stage. In the last 7 games, you just want to see what you're getting out of the rookie class. And which of those four guys, if or how many of those four guys can be functional parts of this roster next season going forward? Can you get actual production out of any of them? My opinion is that the rookie class, you have some NBA caliber players. That's what you have. And Eves Misi hopefully continues to grow into a legitimate rotational big. But everybody else, they are NBA players, yes, but they all have their own flaws in their own way. And they've got a lot to improve. That's why they were talking about beyond Eves, guys who were drafted in the second round or undrafted at all. So um, the rest of those three guys, Keon, Carlo, Antonio, they've all got things that are attractive to you when you watch them play basketball. Carlo has a high motor. Antonio can shoot the basketball and does it when he gets the opportunity. Shot the ball very efficiently. And then you have Keon, who gives you a lot of effort defensively, has good athleticism, has shot the ball well in his minutes. So they each give you something to be excited about, but we'll see what happens there. But again, this week, um, the Lakers and Clippers, the Pelicans get their first look at the Intuit Dome and the Wall. So we'll see how that goes for them. And then the Lakers, a team that has no love lost between them and the Pelicans, two franchises that will be linked together forever for multiple reasons. But the Pelicans, you'd love to spoil the Lakers season however you can, especially if it's this group of guys. If this group of guys that go out and beat the Lakers, that would be really interesting. And just, I think, as much as Pelican fans are hoping for the tank at this stage, I think you'd take a win over the Lakers in that situation. Um, Looking ahead to the draft, excuse me, um, there are some interesting fits for the Pelicans. We've talked about Dylan Harper in particular and how he would fit in with this lineup. With any lineup, you look at Dylan Harper and what he's doing in the NCAA tournament. He's doing a fantastic job. He's played extremely well, um, and shown that he can score at all three levels. He's shown he can pass. He's shown he can defend. Cooper Flagg has done nothing but cement himself as the number one pick. The likelihood is that the Pelicans don't end up with the number one pick. So who do um, they get? Well, I think again after him, you're talking about Dylan Harper. Um, if the Pelicans find themselves in that spot, Dylan Harper is a guy who, in his last game, he went 27, 8-8 against USC in the Big Ten tournament. Um, he's 6'6", 215. He can finish around the rim. He can make shots that are difficult. He is a good defensive player. Um, he can create off the dribble, and he's a good ball handler. So if you end up with him, you get that lead guard. Again, I think his potential as the lead guard to replace DeJounte Murray eventually, to grow into that role alongside Zion Williamson and um, Trey Murphy. I think that you can't do anything but be excited about the prospects of Dylan Harper being the point guard for this team in the future. BJ Edgecombe is not a point guard. If that's what you're looking for, you don't take him for that. You're hurt. He's much more of a two guard, an athletic wing scorer and defender. Um, I think his shot selection leaves something to be desired, but he is exceptional athlete, um, incredibly fast, uh, and and gets to the free throw line. So I think you look at him and you think about his defensive impact at the point of attack. Again, that's very interesting if you're the New Orleans Pelicans because you struggle with stopping guys from getting into the paint off the dribble. Um, his speed, his ability to push the tempo is something that you want. Again, a guy who can run with Zion, who can run with Trey, who can run with the rest of this team. That's what this team has to be. If you're building around Zion Williamson, you need athletic players who can excel in the open court. He can do that. Um, and again, an explosive above the rim athlete. Ace Bailey is one of those players that just I'm a little worried about him. Um, I view him kind of as an offensive black hole. Not a guy who's really interested in getting his teammates involved. He's more of a bucket. Just if you throw it to him, it's going to be a bucket. Um, I think coaching is extremely important for Ace Bailey, more so than I think he and BJ Edgecombe, out of those top four guys, coaching is going to be the most important for them. So whomever the Pelicans hire as head coach is going to be a major, major factor if you bring in somebody like Ace Bailey, who's 6'10", 200, built like Kevin Durant, built like Michael Porter Jr., built like a Rashard Lewis. Um, but he doesn't shoot free throws well. He's not a great defender. He's not a leader. And I know it's hard to put on a kid as a freshman, but if you're taking somebody to be the face of your franchise, and I think that's what you're doing in the top four with this season's draft, is Ace Bailey that guy? And I think that it says something to me that Rutgers didn't make the NCAA tournament. I'm not putting that all on him. You had two guys who were going top five in the draft and they couldn't take their team to the NCAA tournament. That's concerning a bit. But when I look at Ace Bailey's overall game, those are the game gives me the reasons why, in some ways, why Rutgers underachieved. Because he doesn't make his presence felt defensively. Again, all those other things. He's not a great rebounder, even though he's 6'10". He's not a great shot blocker. He's not an intimidator, any of those things. Um, Derek Queen, another guy that we've talked about. I don't know if he's an explosive enough athlete at the center position to warrant this pick if you're the New Orleans Pelicans. I think he could fit with another team and be their day one starting at center. But I think that Derek Queen, if you drafted him that early, um, you'd expect more production than what I think he would give with the Pelicans. Uh, Jeremiah Fears is another guy that has been associated with the Pelicans for his skill set. A little shorter of a shooter at 6'4", not 6'6", but makes his shots. Does a great job of making shots. Good ball handler, uh, shifty, creative. He has an NBA game. Again, I think that his position in the draft is what's concerning more so for Pelicans fans is that if he's available, how far Did you slip in the draft? If you really like him and you're drafting higher than his spot, if you like him and you're drafting higher, but the player that you want is gone, what does that mean? Again, too, if let's say if you're the Pelicans at 4 and you're not in love with Ace Bailey, but someone is, could you trade back to get this young man? And I think it's possible you could, depending on the other teams that are around. He needs to get better, as all young players need to do. He needs to make better decisions. He needs to shoot the ball more consistently. Um, but he has an NBA type game. He has an NBA type game. Um, there are a few other players, I think, like Trey Johnson at Texas on the shooting guard there, another guy who um, to look like a guy who could come in and fit in, but it's about his draft position, not a top 4 guy. So I think that for the Pelicans, I think it's not, are you happy if you drop below 4? No. Is it a disaster if you drop below 4? No. No, it's not a disaster. I don't think that the world comes to an end if the Pelicans do not end up drafting in the top 4, because this is a deep draft. And I think that there are ways to help your team, even if you don't find the player that you want. I think that there are teams that will be interested in those players to make deals available to the New Orleans Pelicans to continue to get better. Um, but that's the main thing. They have to continue to get better. And they've got to find, if you are going to keep a player from this draft, you have to find the right fit. And it's going to be somebody who could be with you longer than Zion Williamson, because you do only have 3 years with Zion. So I think if you are taking that player in, you need to understand, are they going to be a long term role player? Are they going to be a long term building block, like a legitimate part of what you're constructing your team around? Or are they going to be an asset to move on from? So a lot of questions to be answered for the Pelicans, and that's why you can come right here and watch Pelicans Daily. So that'll wrap us up for this episode. So make sure you do like, comment, subscribe, and check out Pelicans Daily each and every week. I'll be here. You can also check me out on social media at DM Grubb or visit thebirdrights.com for more Pelicans coverage. Until the next time, I'm David Grubb, and on behalf of Fan Arch and Pelicans Daily, y'all have a great day.